Good morning, readers. It's Tilly here from Tilly's Shelf, and welcome to another bookish breakfast. So I just got from a night shift, and as you can see, I'm kind of all snuggled up here and getting ready to get into bed. But I finished a book on my break last night, so I thought I would talk to you about it, as it is indeed a Thursday morning. So the book was Paradise by Abdulrazak Gurnah. And Abdulrazak Gurnah is a Tanzanian author who lives in the UK. Aside from being an author, he is also an academic. He works at the University of Kent. He's previously worked at other universities, including ones in Tanzania. And he has a focus on post-colonial writing and writings from, he edits essay collections of writings by African authors and things like that. So I found out about Abdulrazak Gurnah through a FutureLearn course, so a free online course about writing and about I think it's just called How to Write or something. I'll see if I can link it down below. Probably not right now because I'm going to be going to bed, but at some point. And on that course, he was one of the authors that was interviewed at one point. I thought he was going to be interviewed a few more times. I wish he had been, because I think he sounds like an interesting writer. And he talked about sort of stumbling into writing and how his writing really started on him coming to England as a way of interpreting the feeling of having left home and the situation that he was in terms of having left that homeland behind. And that kind of feeling of having left home and moved to a different place and finding your bearings again, it's definitely something that comes in quite a lot in Paradise, which is one of his best known books. And the reason that I picked it up was because it seems to be pretty highly regarded, I suppose, in terms of his work. So I thought he sounded like, of all of the authors that were interviewed for that first week of that course, I thought he sounded like the most interesting. His books sounded like the ones that were most appealing to me, I suppose, and he was one of the ones that I hadn't heard of before, so hence I looked into him and I ended up ordering this one online. So Paradise was written in 1994 and it was shortlisted for the Booker Prize and the Whitbread Prize in that year, and I think it was definitely deserved to get on the shortlist. I don't know what did win that year, but I feel like shortlist is the right level for this book. It wasn't the most amazing book I've ever read, but it was definitely a really good quality book with a really solid foundation to it, if that makes sense. So it's set around the turn of the 20th century, in the years leading up to World War I. That's obviously never explicitly stated in the book because they don't know that it's the years leading up to World War I, but that's the sort of time period that it's based in. And it's set initially in a small town in Tanzania, but then the main character, Yusuf, travels quite a bit, and the story follows him as he moves from place to place and as he grows in age. So I would basically describe this as a coming-of-age novel. In my video on Tuesday, I said it's a coming-of-age novel with kind of symbolism and reminiscences, I suppose, of something like Dante's Inferno, where it's definitely not that level, but as you can tell from the title, there's definitely ideas that are drawn on in relation to ideas of heaven and hell, I suppose, and definitely religion. So I have heard this book described, or read about this book being described as a kind of response to Conrad's Heart of Darkness. I haven't read Heart of Darkness, so I can't say myself whether I think that's strictly true, but definitely I think it plays into the idea of post-colonial writing and being a response to maybe some of the existing narratives. In particular, it subverts the narrative that Europeans were the first people and the only people who were interested in exploring deep into the heart of Africa. That Europeans were the only ones who had trading systems in place, who had any kind of legal system or anything, and it definitely also subverts the idea of Africa as being one kind of homogenous mass prior to the establishment of colonial rule, and that's definitely something that really hangs over this book, is kind of the spectre of colonialism, and it goes from Yusuf mentioning the first few white people he sees to it being constantly, oh, have you heard about the English and the Germans and such, and this increasing kind of sense of threat, I suppose, from the increasing grip of colonialism on the area that they're working in, that they're living in. So in terms of that coming of age novel, because I think that's the most important part of this book, it's very much a character-driven book, I would say, as opposed to a plot-driven book. The plot is interesting but quite gentle. It goes on a journey, but it doesn't go on a journey, if that makes sense. But it's enjoyable in that way. So in terms of this coming of age aspect, I would say that Gurnah is really effective at capturing Yusuf as a young boy when he's sort of 10 or 11. I had just like a really brilliant vision of him in my head at that age. I think he gets slightly weaker as Yusuf gets older. There are moments in his adolescence that are really convincingly captured and really well drawn. But there are other patches where it doesn't, either he feels like he's still a bit younger, or he kind of doesn't feel like he has enough of a presence in the book almost. But I did enjoy the journey that he went on. I would say there's a lot of this sense of threat that I was talking about. Some of it's related to colonialism. Some of it is about Yusuf as a person, and there's a lot about how he looks. He's supposed to be a really good-looking young man. And there's a sense of threat that's built up around that to me was never fully paid off. I could see where the payoff was almost supposed to be, but I felt that it was perhaps slightly lacking from the tension that had been kind of indicated, if that makes sense. But I did enjoy it, and I think the real beauty of this book is the writing style and the themes that it brings in. I think this book is a good book if you are an attentive reader, and if you are really good or if you really enjoy picking up on symbolism and just really like unpicking things and seeing things repeating through the story. I think this would give you a lot back if you were to reread it as well. I would like to reread it one day. I just don't want to reread it soon, if that makes sense. So there's basically the characters in the book are kind of in a way divided into people who travel and people who don't travel. And the people who travel tell stories that are then relayed through people who travel and don't travel in a kind of like a story web, if that makes sense. And some of them are these kind of scary stories of the wolfmen, and you know, did you know that the Germans can, I don't know, like something like burn your skin just by touching it or something like that, like these miraculous powers that they're supposed to have. And some of them are like beautiful stories of, oh, did you know in India there's this paradise garden and things like that. And I think at first I was just reading those for interest, but then I kind of later realised that I should have been paying more attention, because a lot of the things that come up in the stories are symbols that you're kind of supposed to remember, and then they kind of come up not necessarily in physically embodied, but those ideas of those symbols are brought up again later in the book. So I would say pay more attention than I did if you're going to read this book. I think this is one book that would benefit from having an introduction, like the kind of introduction that you don't, we're talking about spoilers this week, that you don't read until after you've read the book, or, you know, from some notes and things as well. But maybe that's just me. Like I like a classic book with notes, and to me this felt more like a classic book that should have had notes than it did like the typical contemporary book that I would read. I did enjoy it. Weirdly, I would say I wanted to enjoy this book more than I did, and I expected to enjoy this book more than I did. If I was going to do a star rating, I would say I really, really thought it was going to be 5 stars, and I was really, really hoping to make it 5 stars, and I kind of almost maybe gave it a little bit more leeway in my mind, like I was trying to push it up to that 5th star, but it's more 4 stars. Just because of the character not being fully realised, like the sense of threat that I mentioned, not quite paying off. And me as an inattentive reader, you know, reading this on my break on night shifts, you know, not exactly bringing my best mind to it, maybe not getting all of the references and all of the picture that he was building entirely. The other thing that I wanted to say was that he portrays this I was going to say world, but region, I suppose, starting in Tanzania, but moving further into the interior of Africa, that is an area with a clash of religions and races, not like leaving aside colonialism, but even within the groups that were there already. Because of that, I think he's trying to do it honestly. There is racist language, there is sometimes homophobic language, there is definite certain treatments of people with physical disabilities or scarring and things like that, that I think he's doing it because he wants to portray that society as honestly as he thinks that society would have been, but just to be aware of that if you're going to be reading it. The thing that bothered me maybe slightly more was that all of the female characters in this book are there exclusively based on how they interact with Yusuf, and they are just there to interact with Yusuf in given ways that generally relate to relationships, if that makes sense. In a way, I didn't mind it because it's a book very definitely about Yusuf and about him growing up and about him starting to have those experiences of having first relationships. But in another way, it kind of would have been nice if some of them had had some personality other than whether or not they fancy him, if that makes sense. And some of them are definitely some of the characters overall, male or female, are caricatures as much as they are characters. Yes, so it's got some interesting things to say as well, I think, about servitude and slavery and dignity and control. Several of the characters in this book are what are called Rahani, so people who have been basically given to this merchant character as payment of a debt, so effectively they're slaves. But it looks at, for instance, reasons why people might stay even when their slavery period has ended. That definitely comes up. And like what it means to be free, I suppose, and what it means to be like going back to this idea of paradise and symbolism. There's lots and lots of garden symbolism and nature symbolism in this book, and it's set up that paradise is the garden. But what if you had that paradise? What could be going on in paradise to not make it a paradise? And obviously, being trapped there would be a thing that would turn it from being a paradise into being a form of hell. So all of that is discussed in a really nice way, I think. So I would definitely recommend this book, and I hope if you read it, you enjoy it and you let me know what you think. And yeah, like I said, I think reading with a bit more attention, you would enjoy it more. The writing is really nice. The writing style, some of the sentences are just really lovely. But just leaving aside those downsides that I've mentioned, I suppose, I would definitely recommend this book. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed that review. I am going to go and get some sleep. Have a lovely day, everyone. Thank you for watching.